It's clinic season again for all you high school coaches out there. You're in LA, Reno, Dallas, Orlando, or maybe you're going to Vegas in a couple of weeks. Diligently taking notes, pictures with your phone, then back to the bar to chop it up with other coaches. The latest and greatest in inside zone, air raid, defensive schemes, and the top-of-the-line equipment that, let's be honest, your school's never going to get for you. Then the next week, back to your team with amazing new concepts, fully refreshed and ready for that undefeated state championship season. Then it hits you. We don't have those kids, and the district's not going to buy any of this stuff for us, and our boosters can't afford it. All you've got left is a brand new notebook that you took a dozen or so pages of notes in, and you got big dreams. You ever ask yourself, was it worth it? Am I taking the right approach? Am I going to the right sessions? In this episode, I talk with Mike Wall. Mike is a retired player of the NFL, 11 years, All-Pro, and Pro Bowl. Since his retirement, Mike has dedicated his coaching experiences to the art of efficiency and effectiveness. Mike explains why there has been a revolution on what practice sessions and a practice week should look like. As a high school coach, I discovered that my greatest mistakes are rooted in my ignorance to sports science. Understanding how to create practices with movements related to strength and conditioning, and my general stubbornness to making a change from old school concepts to concepts that have been proven to help teams win more games. Take a listen as I literally get schooled by a professional. Welcome to the That Coach Sucks podcast. My name is Coach Joe Jurado. I've been a high school coach most of my life. Here, I'll talk with coaches of various levels in sports about their experiences navigating the world of coaching. Come with me on my journey to discover why people decide to get into coaching, why they stay, or why they leave. This is That Coach Sucks. Welcome to episode 5 of That Coach Sucks. On this episode, I have a dear longtime friend of mine, Mike Wall. Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself, and let's jump right into it.
Joseph and I, Coach Joseph, have been friends for, a long time, Joe.
Yeah, 35 years?
Yeah, 35 years. I played, so after I left, we went to Rim of the World together, where Joey led the league in concussions, and I led the league in interceptions at one point. And
hold on, back up. No, now, when you say you led the league in interceptions, you've got to clarify that you weren't always a lineman type of guy.
Yeah. I think I was a heralded baseball player that they assumed, like Todd Marinovich was playing at USC at the time, left-handed blonde kid. I had blonde hair and I am left-handed. So everyone just kind of assumed I'd just be like the next Marinovich, like it was real easy, you know? And I was actually a terrible football player, but my senior year, I moved to tight end. I got recruited to go to the Naval Academy, where I lost 30 pounds in boot camp. Went to play, got to training camp, realized they didn't have a tight end anymore, so I was a blocking wide receiver. They put knee braces in my locker for spring ball that year. I had gained a bunch of weight because I spent all my time in the weight room because I didn't like the military aspect of a military school. And so I ended up playing lineman for the Naval Academy, got drafted by the Green Bay Packers in 1998, played 11 years in the National Football League. I've been in and out of the National Football League in various roles for the last 30 years, it sounds like now. When I went back into the league after I retired, I was a position coach, and then I was the league's first skill development specialist, like in-house skill development specialist for the Miami Dolphins. And then I started consulting with teams and then became really just a consultant with individual athletes and National Football League athletes on a year-round basis, really working on kind of what I just call kind of a race to ownership, helping those guys get to like the knowledge level of a guy like me that I had maybe year 8 or 7 or 8, my second or third contract, trying to get them as young as possible. That means developing your technical mastery, understanding how to watch film, being a self-scout, learning how to scout your opponents, watching game tape, watching practice tape, really just working on the details of the sport. And I do that, and I guess this is probably a parlay into why we're on this discussion. I did that because when I went back into the league in 2015, the league had changed a lot. There was a new CBA. There wasn't as much practice time. Coaches didn't spend as much time with players. A lot of the younger coaches that were starting to come in and scheme had kind of trumped, like everybody knew the coordinators' names. It was really important. Back when I was playing, nobody knew who an offensive defensive coordinator was. Now they're like, most popular guys in the building. And so the individual players just weren't as they weren't as technically sound. They weren't as good as professionally. And I would say that the difference between good guys and everybody else, that chasm had just grown far, far more vast. And so I just saw there was this real value add that I could kind of incorporate and turn into a career where you could help these guys get back to the level of kind of craft mastery and professionalism that we used to play with the current crop of athletes, because it's just not being pushed in the buildings anymore.
So how do you think, or when do you think that chasm started to grow where you have phenomenal athletes, best in the world, right? And now we've got these coordinators you talk about coming in the building, and these guys are as important as a head coach nowadays, right? They're all superstars, and they've got this cognitive genius of the game, but the players don't have the same skill set or how to analyze their play the same. When did that gap really become a thing?
Well, I think it started during that CBA, obviously because it was just the time in the building. So you're always trying to find your competitive advantage. So if you can't, if you're not winning your 1v1s, or if you can't rely on that person to win their 1v1s, then you have to out-scheme them. And then obviously, as that became more popular, I think really with Sean McVay and Sean McVay's such a unicorn because not only the smartest guy in the room, but he also has the highest level of emotional intelligence in the room. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of owners make is thinking they can recreate a Sean McVay when he really is kind of a one-of-one. But when you saw him have success, if it was already going that way, the proliferation of how the building was going to change, I think, became more substantiated in that the way that the daily schedule, we got into many more hours of meetings, much less on-field practice time, much less time for individual work, much less time for player development, and we spend a lot more time, and I think it's something we'll talk about a little bit, on just making sure that the guys feel as physically prepared and cognitively prepared as they possibly can on Saturdays or Sundays, versus what we used to do was kind of I want to feel like the ultimate confidence, which means I have to push my body. I have to have intense practices. I really have to push my mind and really, whether that intensity is from a physical standpoint or I'm training my mind to train my body from a mental standpoint, I need to do everything I can. So when I put my head down on the pillow Saturday night, I know that I've done everything possible, and I know that I deserve to have a successful day the next day. So you've seen a change in the schedules. You've seen a change in the practice times. You've seen a change in the way that the game's approached. You've seen, even the way that they go through meetings now and just trying to capture the attention of this generation where, they say they only have an attention span for 18 minutes. You got to take a break every 20 minutes. Got to go for a water break, all this shit. It's life has just changed. We've just kind of accepted it and gamified a lot of things we do in the building. But I think the reality is at the end of all of it, especially again, we're talking now at maybe the NFL level, maybe more so than high school, Joe. When you're trying to maximize your on-field performance because you're trying to maximize your value, because you're trying to maximize your dollars earned, right? You really are willing to turn over every stone. And I think what I found going back into the building in 2015 was there were so many athletes that it's not that they didn't want to be great. It's that they literally had never been given the tools how, because they're so good at high school level. They get their ass kissed the entire time. They're so good at the college level that, they just kind of physically beat everybody. And now you get into this environment where everybody's as good as you are, from a physical standpoint. You've got guys that have got, mortgages and marriages and different table stakes, right? And so if they've never had to fix their own shit, they've never had to solve their own problems, they get into this void where they really don't know how to do it. They've never been asked to, as opposed to, I think when you and I were growing up, our generation, obviously generations prior to us, it was, you have to figure your stuff out pretty fast or you're just going to fail. And when you fail, you better pick yourself up, or nobody's there to help you. There is no second chance. There is no tomorrow. So I think it's been an evolution, and certainly these athletes are fun to watch, and the game is still very, very entertaining, but it is a different football game. And at the margins, if you can, get a 3% improvement these days, when you look at kind of that level, or even at the high school or college level now, you're talking about a lot more money.
There's a piece there that I really want to address, and it's time management, right? So at the professional level, that's your job. You're in the building, you're working all day. You have the opportunity to have the time in the meetings. It's more evolved scientifically with what's most efficient physically on the field. And I see there's a trickle down from college guys getting with NFL guys, finding out what they do in the building, trying to implement the most efficient practice on the college level, which also is a lot more time than the high school level, where high school coaches are going to meet with college coaches. They're going to listen to college coaches. We call it clinic season right now, right? Every high school coach is out there meeting with college guys, and they're trying to find that 3% that you talk about. How can I get better 3% position by position? Offense, defense, and then overall on the field, right? And when we're talking about high school teams, in particular in California, because that's what I know, we're talking about you've got 3 hours on the field, right? 3 hours on the field, maybe you've got 45 minutes in the classroom and you're breaking down film.
So 3 hours a day?
Yeah. And
that's a lot more time than high school and college. I mean, college and pro.
So that's what I want to,
most teams.
Yeah. That's what I want to get at is, are high school coaches still working a little backwards? Because I think when you talk about back in our day and old school coaches, before there were rules put in place by our governing body, there were coaches that would be on the field for 5 hours a day, right?
Shit, we were.
You'd be on the field for 5 hours a day. There was no film time. There was nothing like a huddle or a digital program where you could go home and watch film. High school coaches, how are they, in your opinion, what's the best way for them to be efficient with their time with athletes on the field, right? Because there's this anxiety of, I've got to teach scheme, I've got to teach technique, I want my kids to watch film. 3 hours on the field, too much time, right?
Yep.
If you're doing that. And then what are we talking, 45 minutes to an hour in the film? Is it more beneficial for coaches to spend that time with their players in the film room, looking at film, and then trying to translate that onto the field? You talked about, and I want to get into this in a minute. So you post a lot of stuff on X that does talk about, the science of sports versus the time on the field. But for high school coaches, where should they be focusing their time if they've got this allotted amount of time with their kids per day? Where should they be focusing that time?
Okay, so if we're just talking, well, I have two answers for you. So if you're talking skill development, the two best things you can do is you can be on the field, kind of doing it, being a kinesthetic learner, and then watching your teammates do it. And then the second best thing you can always do is watch film. But if you're just talking like, so how do you learn? That's really what you're asking, right? Like, how do we learn, right? So how do we learn? So, and everybody's a different learner. So you might be a visual guy, I'm an audio guy. All of us are, all athletes are, it feels like all athletes are kinesthetic learners, which means we learn by doing. So the progression for me is I want to show them what I want them to do. So like Nick Saban always talks about this, and he's the godfather, the guru. But before you get to practice, whether it's a drill, whether it's a scheme or a play you want to run, the players should have already seen it on paper. You should have explained it. You should have showed it, whether you can show it live because you've already done it on film the year before, or you're just showing it on paper. Hey, everybody's lined up here. This is what it's going to look like. Da 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 da. And you probably should have walked through it before you get to practice. And I think what my recollection of high school, and I've been around a couple really good high school coaches for a very small amount of time, just going to their practices. One is Matt loading up at Corona, Centennial Corona, who's one of the best practices I've ever seen, and the other was Butch Kocheroff at Bellevue High School, as a national champion in like 2011. Those guys, they kind of follow that idea of, we're just not going to waste time doing a bunch of demonstration work with the helmets on. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're trying to make the most out of your day, make sure that everybody's got a pad and paper and they understand what notes are supposed to be taken. You need to go through that too. Like, I think one of the things that we make a mistake with, Joey, is that just assuming anything, assuming a kid's going to bring pad and paper, assuming a kid's going to take notes, assuming he knows what to write down. Just those things at the basic level are like, it's 101, but most kids don't really know what to write down. If I went and sat down with your kids and started talking about film, and then I said, take your notes, they're either going to try to write down literally every word I said, or they're, hopefully a couple of them get, the 2 or 3 points that I'm trying to make, just because they don't know how to do it. So I think that's, you got to start there. And that's like one day, it's worth the time. So maybe that's the first part. So you go through the film, you go through your install, you show it. And then what I do is I get up with that individual group and we walk through it. So if it's like an offensive line, I just put up like 4 trash cans, 6 trash cans, whatever it is. And we literally walk through every play and we're communicating constantly. Everyone's making their calls. Everyone's taking their first 2 steps. We get in our stances, body position, everything. But you're doing it so you're kinesthetically learning. So you're kind of going through the audio, you're going through the visual, you're writing it down, and now you're walking through it. So you've kind of gotten through all of that. And now when you get to practice, we can talk about how you want to figure out your practice schedule. But I've already ran all of the base level plays or concepts through with my install, with my film, and with my walkthrough before I ever run them live on the field, whether it's in a small group, individual, or team.
I love what you're talking about, right? It's slowing it down and making sure that they haven't screwed up step 1 and 2 before we get to step 65. Do you think that high school coaches in particular, and these guys, they're great high school coaches. There are guys that just want to get into coaching. There are guys that kind of fall into coaching because maybe their kids played, or they're a graduate of the school and the school needs coaches. Do you think that coaches maybe are insecure to start at something that foundational because they're worried that they're going to lose their kids' attention, or they're going to be criticized because, hey, we need to be on the field. My kid's 7-on-7 coach says he needs to be on the field doing these progressions, with his feet and his route concepts, and you're spending all this time in the classroom. Do you think it's an insecurity thing, or do you think coaches just don't know that they need to go back to square one?
Well, Kurt Cignetti just kind of made a mockery of everybody who spends 3 hours on the field, right? He just won the national championships being on the field for an hour and a half a day and doing classroom and walkthrough time. So if look, I usually never even thought about if somebody's insecure about their practice schedule. Joe, that's beyond me, quite frankly. But I would say this, I do believe that, if you get into the sport, you're getting into the sport at some level. You're getting into the sport because you want kids to be better, and you're trying to elevate people's lives. And so, the concept, everyone's got a different level of commitment. But I generally think people don't do things because they don't know what to do, not because they're just choosing not to do the right thing.
I gotcha. And
so I'm not saying that might not be the right thing for everybody. Don't get me wrong. But once you kind of figure out what you think best practice is, whether you're right or wrong, you've made that decision, you've put that time into research and figure out this is what I think best practice is for me, not necessarily because I saw it at a clinic or whatever, but I've done my research and I understand how people learn and blah, 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 blah. Or, 7-on-7 guys, honestly, who cares about them? I think that it's usually an ignorance thing more than anything else because they just haven't, taken the time to go through it. I find when if guys are open to learning something. The reality is with coaching, Joe, is like a lot of guys get into coaching, and I was just in Germany for a year, and a lot of the German coaches, I'm like, hey, do you want to come over? We're the pro team in town. You want to come over and we'll do a coaches clinic? And they're like, we got into coaching so we could do it our way. It's like, well,
interesting.
Okay. I mean, but that's your prerogative. You're just hurting those kids, but that's your prerogative, right? But you would think in a highly competitive environment, you're just trying to find the edge. Right. And California high school football is highly, highly competitive. So if you're trying to find the edge, then it's like, why not leave no stone unturned? Let's look at this from a different angle. What's right 40 years ago maybe isn't right today because we have so much technology. We understand how the brain works a little bit better, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is, and this is what we were getting to off air a little bit, is that, and I've kind of thought this way for a long time, and I didn't know how to put it into words, and maybe until the last couple of years, but, except for the quarterback and the kicker, we're all one-on-one confrontational athletes. So if I'm looking at it from a player's perspective, my real value to the team, like my guarantee that you're going to play me is that I can win my 1v1s. Right. And so it's like, how do I do that? Well, I have to, in order to win my 1v1s, I got to have, technique, sporting intelligence. I have to be as fresh as possible so I can win them in the third and fourth quarter. So I'm valuable to the team. And so if I'm beating the shit out of my player, am I allowed to swear on here?
Yeah, go for it. Okay. You're good.
Yeah, if I beat the shit out of my players for 5 hours a day or 3 hours a day, whatever it is, and they're not fresh on Friday night, as a coach, I'm an idiot. I haven't made them, that doesn't make anybody tougher. We used to think that made you tough. Like mental toughness is 3 things, right? You have to train an intensity level higher than your opponents. Intensity doesn't mean I have to be the most physical team in the world. I can manage my intensity by how many people like by reducing the size of the field, by increasing the amount of people on the field, by reducing the amount of time that I have to make a decision, et cetera, et cetera. There's a different ways to change intensity. It's not necessarily just I'm going to beat the shit out of each other every day. I have to do that on a consistent basis. Number two, I have to do that on a consistent basis over this time period. Whether that time period is your game week, whether it's the course of the entire season where you break it down to quarters, however you want to look at it, but you have to be consistent during that basis. And then you have to get your team to buy in and believe that that matters. That's the difference in your life, right? You have to, like, some of this has to be, I'm doing this to get a result. And I believe if I do it, my result is going to work. So it's a little bit of not placebo effect, but you do have to take this leap of, I believe I'm doing this the right way, and this is kind of building up my stamina. So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the key to mental toughness. The mental toughness is trying to. So if I have an hour and a half, then my intensity better be pretty high. If I have 3 hours, I could probably use it. Yeah. Like if I go to a gym, I used to work out for 3 hours a day. I used to work out for 5 hours a day. But at some point, you go like, well, that's not very efficient. Like I can only keep my levels, my hormone levels up for 45 minutes to an hour and a half. After that, I'm fluctuating. So when you start figuring out the science behind stuff, you go like, all right, I want to do this as well as I can for this amount of time. And then the rest of it, we should be, these kids are sponges. Like let them learn, and they don't have to learn by banging. They need to learn this conceptually first so they can go out and run it. When they get the first opportunity to run it, they don't have to run it 6 times. They can run it once or twice.
Yeah. So you've really two pieces that always existed as one piece when we were younger, a previous generation. The mental toughness, the emotional toughness, and we're going to get there through physically beating the crap out of each other. We're going to make you tougher by having long practices, and we're going to run old school Oklahoma drills, and you're going to learn emotional toughness basically through survival, right? If you survive these drills, you're going to be emotionally competent. I think that was us in high school, was like, oh, I did this against this player, so I'm emotionally tough. I've got the confidence, right? There's new science behind that says you don't have to put kids on the field. You don't want to put kids on the field for 4 hours, 3 hours, 3.5 hours because of those variations in a football game. You don't want a kid to come out in the first quarter and play perfect 98%, but then in the second quarter now he's down and he doesn't even know why he's down, and it could be related to the fact that you have a 3-hour practice where the kid's going 100% for 15 minutes and now he's sitting down for 15 minutes and now he's back up for 15 minutes, and we don't practice the way the game is actually played on the field. So you want those kids to be fresh. They need to have the knowledge. And I think the cognation of the game is what's starting to trickle down and change. Coaches are realizing, you know what? We need to spend more time in the classroom with these kids, teaching them, than we do standing on the field and trying to teach them on the field and combine that teaching with the technique. They're two different things. Am I off on that?
Let me just preface it. Like I'm fully on full pads, beat the hell out of each other. Like I've loved physical football, and I do think that you need to grease the groove. You need to toughen the leather, however you want to word it. But you do need to put that time in. It's just, I think that the amount of time versus what we used to have to be put through, I think those are just two different things. It doesn't need to be 4 hours. It can be an hour and a half. It could be specific sessions during the practice, because like we remember, there'd be a lot of those practices that were just shit. They just weren't very good. They were sloppy. It wasn't put together very well. People don't use technique. And so it's like, again, how do you build a skill? Well, for each coach out there, how do you build a skill in your athlete? Well, a skill is a merging technique, which technique is just a series of movement patterns that we put together to form a technique. Okay. So that could start with your initial stance, your first and second step, your body position into contact, where your hands are, et cetera, hip hinge, hip levels, et cetera, all that stuff, right? So you figure that out, and you have to rep that enough where it becomes automatic in your athlete. And what that means is it becomes a habit. So I'm just trying to form a bunch of different habits that I'm going to call techniques in my athletes, so they don't have to use any brain power in order to figure out how to defeat somebody or how to execute a certain technique. Because the other part of skill is being, and especially in football, is being the best decision makers on the planet. the best athletes are the best read and react athletes, or the best decision makers in the sport. And so what that means is I want to turn down that how to beat somebody, and I want to turn up and use all my brain power at bringing in what I call relative external cues. So globally, from a coach's standpoint, situational football, down and distance, personnel, formation, etc. Right? Local standpoint, from a player, my opponent, stance, alignment, depth of the linebacker, offset of the tight end, offset of the running back, where he is in gun, 2x2, where's the inside outside leverage on the DBs. I want to bring all that information in so I can have some sort of pre-snap recognition of what the play could be. And then as the ball snapped, I need to start going through all the reps that I took of that Rolodex. Seen this before, I know where to put my hand. Seen this before, I know he's going to break the route off at 7 yards, et cetera, right? And so I can do a lot of that on the field, but I can also do a lot of that decision-making off the field. And that's what I think coaches didn't understand before, that we probably do a little bit better job of understanding now, is while I need to do all of that technical stuff on the field, and we don't spend a lot of time doing it, I can do a lot of the decision-making off the field, and we don't spend a lot of time doing that. So we're kind of like, you're kind of burning the candle at the both ends, where the guys that are really efficient and understand how that works are kind of leveling up their entire team.
Yeah, those are the top guys regionally, wherever you're at. Those coaches understand that stuff the most.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not like football's. All these sports are really simple, and we try to, with the scheme and the person. I mean, we try to make it really complex and complicated, so that it's like everybody else. So your job becomes more valuable, right? But really, the best coaches that you're going to be around are usually the people that are most interested in teaching, because the teachers are the one. Like, a teacher goes into a classroom and goes like, all right, Johnny is a visual learner. Sally's got to write something down. Taylor over there, he's got to hear it. Whatever it is, like, they understand there's different things. And so you have to be curious about the way your athletes are bringing in information and able to translate it. And the easiest baseline thing to do is like touch all the bases, or at least 80% of the top deviations of all the bases of how to teach these guys before you even get to the field. So at least they're coming in with some sort of knowledge base that is consistent across the entire rank, but they're able to start making minute mistakes that you can correct easily on the field, versus like, we're trying to pull our head of our ass on day one.
So you've talked about some things, and I don't want to get into this coach is right and that coach is wrong, or this scheme is great and that scheme is bad. But this past season, you've touched on some things about the offensive game and how the offensive game went through a massive evolution of passing and setbacks and RPO concepts, and how the game is gradually not coming back to, but more coordinators are simplifying things and getting under center, which changes a skill set for quarterbacks, because now we've got a whole generation of quarterbacks that only know how to take a snap out of shotgun, right? They only know how to move their feet a certain way. And because of that evolution at the quarterback play, it's made it a little easier for the defense when you talk about tendencies and recognition, right? Well, if the quarterback's in gun and the back's over here, there's only so many things they can do. And some of the things they can do, they can't do very well, like run an inside zone, right? Do you think that the game is evolving to a point where young athletes, they need to stop thinking about being specialist in one thing and be more diverse? Or do you think that we're just going to go through a whole generation of kids that only know how to play a position this way? Offensive linemen only know how to kick step and get in a 2-point stance, and quarterbacks only take gun and they only run RPOs. Do you think we'll have a full back to under center kids and linemen that can get in a 3-point stance, or will they be more diverse? Will coaches mix their scheme up a little bit more to say, you know what, I need these kids to learn how to do both things?
Well, the evolution of the actual scheme, if you're starting, regardless, I suppose, of what level you're talking about, is a consequence of the personnel on the other side of the football. So the reason that teams have gone part of the reason that teams have gone under center or get excited about 12 and 13 personnel and all these is because linebackers don't know how to take on fullbacks, because edge rushers have gotten lighter. So you want to attack the edge in the run game so you can base your offense off of wide zone. And all of that stuff is very conducive to play action football. It also makes the reads a lot easier for the quarterbacks, although the footwork is different, like as you said. It gives you a lot more diversity. It's a lot easier to run the football from a running back standpoint. The time to the line of scrimmage is less than it would be out of gun, particularly out of pistol. So I think that's, it's always going to be a function of, where the opposing side goes. And so, for example, if high school defenses went to a 6-man line, all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm going to spread it out again. It's inevitable. Or if they go back to, we want all our linebackers at 240 pounds in high school, I'm going to start, I'm going to spread it out and throw the football and put those guys in a bind, right? So in the offense, we're always looking for conflict players, regardless of what level we're talking about on the field. And usually, part of the RPO game was like, okay, we don't know how to block anymore. And we have these conflict players at defensive end that our guys can't block. So we're just going to put them in conflict all the time. Or we've got this really good like hybrid safety, and that, we're having a hard time beating 1-on-1 in the slot. So what are we going to do? Oh, we'll put him in conflict so he can't be right. Like just that's all these guys are really trying to do, is just trying to find that matchup where you want to put that weak player, or maybe some potentially their strongest player in conflict. But I do think that it's like the size of linemen, the size of running backs, it kind of undulates generation to generation. You saw, who is the absolute best defensive tackle in the last generation is Aaron Donald. He's like 275.
Yeah.
Right. When I was playing up to Ted Washington was 400 pounds. You know what I mean? Like it changes with, one side shifts, the other side overcorrects and back and forth. I do think that right now you're going to continue to see, and you are seeing it now because of, the way that football works, obviously in the NFL, and I don't know if I'm not still sure, Joey, if it trickles down or trickles up. But right now with the Shanahan and McVay trees getting hired everywhere, you're going to see a lot more wide zone stuff, right? Because that's Shanahan's base run. And so a lot of teams are going to go into that. And so there's so many wrinkles out of it, yes, but I think from a defensive standpoint, if you're looking at like, okay, we're playing one of their disciples, part of his tree, that base structure is going to be somewhat familiar. And so at some point, that'll have to change again. But I think we probably got another 5-7 years before that happens.
Trickle down, trickle up is a great question, because I think a lot of it is trickle up. What are the college coaches doing that the high school coaches replicate, that create the athletes that get into college, that get drafted? You look at these DLs at Miami, right? These guys are huge. They're hybrids. Is that going to change the game inside at all, right? You looked at, the Super Bowl yesterday. What did Seattle, in my opinion, what they did so much better than New England was run the ball. And you hear all the pundits talk about, well, this is what this team needs to do to win the game. And I hear more and more talk about, if you can't run the ball, then you're not going to be a champion on whatever level. And I do think that we're starting to move a little further away from the air raid concepts of, everybody's going to kick step, the quarterback's going to RPO it and launch it down the field to find a linebacker or safety on the outside that we can expose, when the best teams have figured out that the personnel on the other side of the ball is smaller. They're fast. They can make a play, but they're going to make that play 4 or 5 yards down the field. And offensive linemen, I think, are going to start getting bigger again. And I do think that you'll see a swing. But you're right. I agree with you. It's going to be a few years away, because you got to go through a whole generation of these athletes at the lower level that only know how to play this one way. Right? They're 5-on-5, 7-on-7 concept guys. This 5-on-5 stuff, and they're only being taught to kick step in a 2-point stance, right? These one-on-one battles, get around and hit a bag. And I found that a lot of the best high schools here in Southern California, yeah, their linemen all do that, but their linemen can also play some gap scheme concepts. They can double down to a linebacker and then just eviscerate you, in the secondary, because you don't have anybody that can, one, take on my fullback, and two, tackle a running back that weighs 215, 220 pounds. So I don't know where the game is going, but I do know that I think there was a de-evolution at a skill set where we used to teach kids how to do multiple things on both sides of the ball. We teach them how to pass block and we teach them how to run block. We taught defensive backs, they weren't just playing one-on-ones with kids. They were also learning how to tackle, right? And not just go for the ankles and rugby tackle and all these evolutions on the defensive side of the ball, right? A lot of kids now at the high school level, they have one skill set. And if they get exposed, their weakness, their kryptonite, as you called it earlier when we were talking, good high school coaches will say, well, we're going to run at that kid because he's a great coverage guy. We can't throw at him, but he can't tackle, right? So we're going to scheme towards that. And I wonder at what point will high school football or football in general get back to less specialization and more, you're just a good football player. You can do your position, all the things that are required of your position. You can do it pretty well. And I think a lot of that, it does take time to teach it, right? Film it, review it with the athlete and say, look, your coverage here, your feet, your hips are great. Your shoulder placement, your hands placement. But now when you break down on the ball, what are you doing here with this technique? You don't know how to tackle. And tackling is another piece. Tackling has gone through this massive evolution of form tackling and then rugby tackling. And then it's like we can't get it right. We don't know what's the best technique. And I think that's got to change too a lot, right? For the safety of the game, that's got to change because we change things like the NFL changes the kickoff rule for safety. And I get that. And I think the rules trickle down. Whatever the NFL is deciding is safest, that's going to trickle down to the NFHS rulebook inevitably, and we're going to take that on at the college and high school level. But I wonder how the game is going to change because it starts with those individual players, right? And it starts when they're in high school because that's the trickle up. The high school kid's going to college, and that college kid is going to be drafted one day if he's good enough in the NFL. That's what I think drives the change in the game, in my opinion.
What's the question?
I guess the question is, well, the question is, what should high school coaches? We want to emulate the best college coaches, but is that what's best for us? Right?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Should high school coaches be working so you understand way more of the game than 99% of every high school coach I've ever talked to or worked with? Because you don't just approach the game from a physical standpoint, but also an emotional standpoint, a cognitive standpoint. Who should high school coaches, and here's my question, who should high school coaches be reading and be listening to and be connecting with to make the game stronger?
Yeah, listen, I think the hard part is there's obviously an information gap between a full-time college coach and a part-time high school coach. There's a natural information gap. Like, in other words, if you just have one thing to do all day, you're just going to come up with more ideas. And, so it's kind of like, I'm a player development guy. I'm not as interested in what scheme you're running. I've kind of tried to make everything so that I'm kind of scheme agnostic, opponent agnostic. Like, my belief is you put any of my guys up against anybody you want in any situation, they're going to know how to handle it. That's how I think about the sport. That's how I think about like getting into a bat. And so if you're a high school football coach, I think it's really important that you don't fall in, you have to have a really good understanding of who you want to be. You don't have to fall in love with the latest scheme or the latest, you kind of have to you have to be a bit of an alchemist in the sense that you're not going to have the best athletes necessarily at every position, and you're not able to recruit them necessarily as well. So it's like, your system has to be formulated every year so that you can kind of change to fit what you have. And then, so how do you do that? Like, how do you build a sustainable business doing that? Or how do you build a sustainable organization? It's like, well, you have to be really good at the fundamentals. And whether that means you can start at the junior All-American, because you have a pipeline and they're all running the same plays, or they're all learning how to tackle this. Like, I used to teach tackle in the National Football League, right? And it's, again, you just go back to, there's all these different ways to do things, but there's kind of a best practice, the way your body's supposed to move, way to do things too. And if you just kind of stick to that, you're probably going to be okay. We don't need to make this too complicated so guys can make extra money doing nonsense, but if you can teach all this with all the same language, so Joey, I'll back up. The most important thing you can do is create a language system that all your coaches and all your players understand, whether it's tackling, blocking, scheme, route running, concepts, pass concepts, whatever. The language is the most important thing. Is you got coaches coming from different backgrounds, you got players coming from different places. If you can create a language system that you can all communicate in the same way, you're better than 80% of the coaching staffs out there already. And then just having a consistency and like, this are the fundamentals of what we do. Like, we can just execute the basic requirements of our positions better than everybody else. Then whether it's we keep the same system for 10 years in a row or we're changing the same system every spring, you're going to be okay, because you understand like the real importance of what I do is, how do I get to this spot on the field under control so I'm in position to make a block, make a tackle, make a catch, et cetera, right? And then I think what coaches should do from there is now go to these clinics and what system fits the personnel that you have? What excites you? What do you have time to install? Are we talking about, we go to a clinic, are we talking about, hey, these are the drills that we're using? Great. I love your drills. Do I need equipment for those drills? Are those drills fulfilling the needs of my players? Am I doing it because it has a lot of bags? Is it doing it because, why am I doing everything? So I guess the short answer is like, ask the question, why am I doing everything that I'm doing? Is in the best interest of my players? Do I have a language system that aligns my players and my coaching staff? And how early can I start that language system in my community? Am I teaching my coaches? Am I coaching my coaches and how to just develop their players at the basics of their position? And then, do I have the bandwidth to adjust my basic system and scheme every year to fit the personnel I have in my building? And if you just do those four things, and that's going to be based on, again, time, having, planning right, calendars, et cetera. But if you can do that, like, you're gonna have what I call perpetual supremacy, which is the ability to be in contention every single year.
So this is going to be a really fundamental question for high school coaches, right? But I think what you're getting at is, stop focusing so much on the latest and greatest scheme that some coach from A&M wherever has taught you at a clinic. Instead of going and focusing on that, what can you get out of a clinic? Well, you can adapt what you've learned to meet your athletes, what their strengths are, right? Don't overthink it. And I think the one thing, and I think you're talking about this, is the constant that a good coach can have, especially at the high school level, is the constant is the language, the culture, right? We might have to adjust what we do schematically, what front we run or what offense we run. We're going to have to make changes, but the things we don't have to change every year is our language, how we communicate with coaches and with players, and the kind of culture that we drive, the confidence, right? Really important piece, especially at the high school level. Kids have to be confident. They can't be confident if they're confused, and they're going to be confused if your scheme changes all the time. And and this coach uses this language and that coach uses that language. I think, and this is my opinion with coaching, is simplify it and get really good at the most foundational techniques, whatever you want to call them, fits of the game. And you'll be successful because your kids will be confident because they're not confused.
So if I'm working with a guy and I see him, like, I'm working with a tackle and I see him jump setting, inevitably he's going to get beat. And coaches teach it all the time and think it's great. And I'll just ask him this question. If you're getting paid to pass set and and your value to the team is not getting beat, are you going to practice, or when you have your ass on the line, do you want to do the thing that you've practiced 10,000 times, or do you want to practice the thing you do every once in a while as a changeup? Right? And I think coaches can think about that as well when they think about their system and their scheme and the way they want to, constantly. It sounds like they constantly want to, tweak what's the latest and greatest, all of that. That works if you have the bandwidth from a meeting standpoint, from consistency in your coaching staff, and you're able to ingest and process and talk about and really know the new system that you're putting in, if you were putting a new system every year or two. But if you don't have that bandwidth or you don't have that level of consistency in your staff, then I think what you're doing is effectively going out there and trying to teach something that you're not an expert in yourself.
Yeah.
And then when you lose, the inevitable part is like the thing that I hate the most, this happens in the NFL all the time, is like when you win a game, the coaches are all hugging each other. And this is not every staff, by the way. This is only the bad ones. And then when they lose, it's like, players got to get it done. It's like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That doesn't sit right necessarily. And it's not that it's not sometimes true. When you go out and your ass is on the line, you want to be really, really good at doing whatever it is you do through the amount of repetitions you've been able to take, through the film you've been able to watch, the discussions you've been able to have, through the installs you've been gone through, the communication, all of that. And the impediment to that is constantly trying new stuff in the name of saying, look at me, I've got all these different techniques, I've got all these different systems and schemes.
So one last thing, and we talked about it beforehand, but I want any coach that's listening to this hear it, because you know more about it than all of us. And it's that time on the field, and it's that movement with the player. And you had made a comment to me that coaches should be working with their strength conditioning coaches, right? They should be, what movement are we doing in the weight room and, in the gym? What kind of movements are you doing? And is what I'm teaching conducive to the most efficient movement where we can have the most power and the most speed? Can you talk just a little bit about that and how that relates? Because I don't think a lot of coaches understand that. If I have a strength conditioning guy, or if I'm just a coach running a weight room, it's like, here's our 12 lifts, and now we're going to go out in the field and practice, and those things might not ever line up, right? Can you talk about the importance of that?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is if you put a plate of food and some weights in front of a high school kid and he uses both of them, he's going to get stronger. There's no question about it, right? Just hormones are flaring up. They're going to pack on muscle. They're going to get stronger. It's a quality of movement. It's the retention or improvement of movement while you gain that strength, while you gain that explosiveness, while you gain that body armor, that really is going to make the difference in your athletes. I think the first and maybe most obvious thing is just, how are you supposed to, what is an athletic position? And every coach kind of intuitively maybe thinks that they know what an athletic position looks like, but how wide should your base be? How far should your hips be back? What is the range between different athletes? What's kind of a baseline? Where should we put our mental weight? What part of the foot when we're trying to move a certain way? When we want to open up and run, what's the best way to do that? Are we reaching? Are we pushing? All of those little things. When we screen our guys, when we're just watching our own athletes, a lot of bigger guys have ankle mobility issues. Are we screening for that within our strength staff or with our position coaches and communicating with their strength staff? Are we screening, their hip mobility? Are we just going through this? Do we have some sort of, whether if it's an FMS screening or some other just basic screening to understand where these guys are able to, like maybe some of your linemen aren't even able to get into a 3-point stance because they're so big and their hips are poor, their ankles are poor, right? Maybe some of your defensive backs, your linebackers aren't able to break down without getting a wide base because they have poor ankle mobility. Right. Or they're not very good at decelerating. So they don't have very good eccentric control, muscle control. Right. So their motors aren't firing in the proper sequence. Like, these are all things that we can tell. Like, I can watch you and go, oh, well, Joey gets his feet real wide when he tries to break down to make a tackle. So he always lunges and ends up missing his tackle. Okay. Well, how do we fix that? Right. And then you go talk to the strength coach. All right. He's got a decel problem. Can you watch him decel? Okay. Well, he's got a decel problem is it his ankles? Is it his eccentric movement, et cetera? How do we figure out how to improve that? How do we help him drop his hips? And so that's how we can really help guys get better. Now, the thing that when it gets really fun is when we learn that as a coach, and now our drill is actually to sprint, decel, reaccelerate into contact. And we're watching that with both the eye of a position coach or a coordinator, and now of a guy who understands what the movement's supposed to look like, so we can either talk directly with that player or have a sidebar with the strength conditioning coach. Hey, we need to work on it with this group or this individual athlete.
And that circles all the way back to, we don't need to spend 3 hours on the field. There's time in the weight room and there's time in the classroom, and there's time on the field, and they all have to work together. If you want to have the most efficient athlete that's performing at his maximum capacity, it can't just be 3 hours of tackling on the field or running routes, right? There's got to be a relationship with all of them. And I think talking to your strength and conditioning coach and designing a conditioning program that's relevant to football is one of the greatest travesties in high school football right now, because running 1040s and, running 18 gassers and doing bear crawls and things that aren't football movement and football related, it's really just, it's hurting the athlete, not helping the athlete.
Well, it's
right?
it's like if you go and talk to a sprint coach, like think about this when we were playing. If you go and talk to a sprint coach, no sprint coach would say that running hundreds or 50s or anything with your pads on. I mean, if you're trying to actually get faster, running gassers or running, hundreds, and if you're tired of 50s, if you're tired of 20s, if you're tired, it doesn't get you faster.
Makes you tired. That's it.
It really makes you slower because your form gets worse, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to build peak speed, for example, with your athletes, so like a lot of the kind of the new wave of it started in high school again, where innovation starts, I think, for a lot of these guys, because you can experiment a little bit. A lot of these guys the sprint coaches are getting involved, and they're saying, well, wait a second, if you want these guys to maximize their kind of physical ability on game day, you should be sprinting twice a week, take away all this other nonsense, let them get their conditioning by having these full speed reps in practice. And that doesn't mean you have to take anybody to the ground, but you're running your routes full speed, you're finishing through the line, whatever. And that's how we get our conditioning. But we're going to actually try to scale down the amount of like repetitive cardio work in order to get our glycogen levels up in our muscles, have ourselves feel really good on Friday nights, and maximize. If we want the ideal scenario for an athlete, and I think this is where high schools, and I haven't been in high school a long time, just kind of speaking off of what I hear, what I know from my experience. A lot of high school athletes and a lot of coaches are like, look, we're at 100% on day one, and obviously we don't want to get down to like 20%, but there's going to be this natural degradation because we grind, we work so hard, we spend 3 hours on the field. Okay, great. The reality is the athlete should be thinking like, I want to get 1 to 3% better, stronger, faster during the season, because really my hard day is my game day. The rest of the day is like, I could practice hard, but it's not a hard day like a game day is. And trying to recreate like an actual game day on Tuesday and Wednesday is just a recipe for overworking the body and not allowing yourself to be at peak physical performance on Friday. And in doing so, you're also taking away, because of the time you have with the athlete, the ability to let them improve that decision-making process by some of the things you can do in the film room and in the meeting room.
Deconstructing practice plans, focusing the toughest day is game day. I think that's the message that coaches need to start understanding, right? So, hey, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be on with me. Where can coaches find you? Get a little more information about what you're talking about.
Well, listen, I put out some, like, I do some Packers media. I'm on X, MikeWall68 on Twitter, or X, whatever it is, Process to Perform on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel where I break down a bunch of film. Joe, I don't spend a ton of I try to keep low profile, especially with my guys. So I will break down Packers tape all the time and stuff like that if you guys want to check that out, because I really do try to get to the heart of what's going on in a football game. Maybe a different take than a quarterback would, certainly, but also a different take that you're going to see from just a lot of the standard boilerplate stuff. So if you guys enjoy that, check that out. Process to Perform on YouTube is probably the best way to find it.
Thanks again to Mike Wall for speaking to me and exposing some of those practices that coaches need to lay to rest. Take a listen to what Mike is putting out on YouTube at Process to Perform and see his show Block Party. One quick plug for all you high school coaches out here in Southern California. The Southern California Football Coaches Association is putting on its annual Coaches Clinic on Saturday, March 14th at Golden West Community College. This year, we're also hosting an awards dinner on Thursday, March 12th at Old Ranch Country Club in Seal Beach. You can find more information at www.myscfca.com or email us at myskifgood@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of That Coach Sucks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on all your social media platforms and on YouTube at That Coach Sucks. If you're a coach and you have an interesting story to share, please reach out to us at thatcoachsucks@gmail.com. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring us or you would like to have a plug read on our podcast, please email us and let us know what you have in mind. Until next time, remember, that coach sucks.